So I am mic'd up. You should be able to hear me out in the atrium. For those of you who have coffee, we've got the windows open. So this is great. We can all be one big community. I took a special dispensation from the Altar Guild, which is about the same level of authority as the Pope in our church, to have my coffee in here because I could not go without coffee. So I have a few handouts if I could get some volunteers to make sure these get to people in the nave and in the atrium. And this has the specifications. It's got the stop list of the Schantz organ, as well as on the back you'll see the stop list for the Harrison and Harrison organ up in the balcony. And it's also got some rather helpful diagrams on here that there's a little bit of humor in it because I have not met an organist who was not a little bit twisted in the head. Myself included in that, I will fully admit. So, what's that? Thank you. So I also have, these are not, I scared Lewis because he came into practice this week and there were 3 pipes sitting on the console and he was worried that they were from our organ and he wanted to know what was going on. These are actually from an organ at a church in Iowa that closed, and former parishioners of this church, their parents went to that church and they got me these organ pipes as a gift, and who would have known how helpful they would be for this demonstration. So I'm going to pass these around. I would advise that you probably don't want to blow on it because there's this thing called COVID that's going around. We don't quite share things the way we maybe used to. But this will give you a good illustration. We have hundreds and hundreds of pipes just like this in these 2 cases. So, how does a pipe organ make sound? That's what we'll start with. I have some notes here to keep myself grounded and on the right track because I do have ADD, so my brain can kind of go in a million different places. And if there's ever any questions that you have as we're going through things, please raise your hand and I will call on you so we can address it. So how does a pipe organ make sound? Each of these pipes is like its own little whistle. And what that means is that it makes one sound, and that's the only sound or pitch that pipe is going to make. As you can see, it's a hollow tube, not much to it. There is a lip in here, and the air just blows through. If we need to tune the organ, each pipe is a little bit different in their structure. Sometimes the metal that they're made of will be different from one rank to another. Sometimes the shape of the pipe. So this is a principal pipe. This is a standard. When you think of a pipe organ, what does it sound like? It's going to be what's called a principal. It's a type of pipe, and I'm jumping ahead on my notes, but that's what this one is. And it's just an open pipe. It's very straight. Once you get to the length of the pipe, it doesn't change in diameter. And then it's got this little metal sleeve on top. So if we need to make it a little bit longer, that'll make it a lower note. If we need to make it shorter, you can hear a slight difference in the pitch there. So when the organ tuners come in, they have hundreds of pipes that they have to adjust the pitch individually. What happens with metal when the temperature changes? It expands or it contracts. So when it does that expansion and contraction, the tuning bits are going to slide. Or maybe a climate change is happening, or we're going from summer into fall into winter, and we have to adjust. When are our big festivals of the church year? In completely different weather situations. We've got Easter and we've got Christmas. Really hot, well, could be hot and humid. Could be the same as Christmas and Easter. You never know. And also we had 60-degree weather in December, so it's hard to tell. But typically opposite ends of the year, so we have to tune at various points in the year so that it can still sound pretty. And you may or may not notice when it starts to sound unpretty. I noticed David Berman did not notice, and I said, well, you just confirmed for me I do not want you to be on an organ committee when we put one together. So he knew what he was doing. Most of the pipes in an organ will be made out of metal. The metals that they use are mostly a combination of tin and lead, different alloys with different percentages of tin and lead. Some of the larger pipes will also use zinc. That's important to know. Zinc is also used in some organ pipes. We will come back to that. Typically, you will have one pipe for one sound. So on the keyboard, an organ keyboard has 61 keys instead of 88 of a piano. So if I have one, we'll call it a stop. That's what I pull out. I want to play this set of pipes. You may also hear it referred to as a rank. They are slightly different, ranks and stops, and we'll get into that a little bit. But if I play a C, I'm hitting one, it's opening up to hit one pipe that sounds at C. If you look on the back of your handout, this was an article from a Cleveland paper about an organ that they were renovating at Oberlin College, but this was just too perfect of a column to not include. So down in the basement, if you can call it a basement, down underneath the church is where our blower is. So when this is running, you don't actually hear the blower because it's down underneath us. And then it sends wind up to the two parts of the organ. So this organ is divided between the swell and grate are on this side, and then this side is called the choir. That will come into play later. So we send the wind to both of these. In here, we've got reservoirs that keep, as you're running a motor to keep the wind going, we want to keep it regulated. Otherwise, you have different amounts of stops, so the wind is going in a bunch of different directions. It could cause you to lose some of the sound, and then it's not going to work properly. So we have wind reservoirs in there that are on bellows, and that adjusts to however many notes are being played at that particular time. And then it goes into wind chests. So this is fun because some of the organ is exposed in this church. So you can see the set of pipes on either side are sitting in racks. Mary Bailey, do they kind of remind you of the test tube racks? Is what I always think of. And then on that, there's a wind chest. So the wind stays underneath the chest, and then when I pull a stop, it's going to open up to allow the wind to flow through that pipe when the key is played. So a stop covers the wind from escaping so that when I play a key, that mechanism is still going to allow the wind to go through. But if the stop is not pulled, it's stopped and the wind is not going through. So the wind comes from underneath the church, it's going into reservoirs, and then it's being into the wind chests. Once a stop is pulled and a key is pressed, that allows the wind to go through, and then you hear the sound of the pipe. That was a really down and dirty and the most I feel qualified to say, so do we have any questions on that?
How does the instrument know how much air to release? Like, is that computer controlled, or is that...
So the specification on organs that you'll often see is the amount of wind pressure. So there is a regulated amount of wind pressure. I wish I could tell you how much pressure ours sits on. Typically, the louder it needs to be, the higher the wind pressure is set. So theater organs, they have these huge spaces, and they're actually not very large organs typically because they have the wind pressure so high. There are some theater organs that they actually, right now, ours, they just sit. It's not a whole lot of wind pressure. I mean, I'm not blowing very hard to make that sound. And that's about what it would sound like in an organ. But you multiply that by the hundreds, it's how you get the full organ sound. The trumpets, however, we have 2 trumpets on this organ for a quick demonstration. Or this one is on a much higher wind pressure. That's what we call the rapture trumpet, or the Annunciation of Christ's return is with that trumpet. Christ or a bride, whichever. Depending on the day, one of those is more important than the other. It's always Christ. It's always Christ. And that's also what so I had mentioned the bellows and the reservoirs. They often are weighted as well to just keep it regulated so that you get that consistent sound. So that is one of the things, and one of the art of organ building is determining the right amount of pressure for the space to get the organ to sound the best. But it doesn't get adjusted. It's part of the overall design and construction of the instrument. Yes?
I would like to know, excuse me, why is it that so many churches all over the world have an organ?
So that is a really good question. The organ has existed, and I wish I had a better answer for this, since at least the 1400s. The technology for organs has evolved, but has existed in some form going back to ancient Greece. In Greece, they actually had what they call a hydraulophone, which used water to create the sound, but it operated under the same concept. If you think about horns, and I had mentioned like this is just 700 or more whistles, that technology has existed and it's been easy to replicate. We did not have electrified blowers in the 1400s. We had people who would get paid to jump up and down on the bellows and manually create that flow of air. So that was also, going later into the time, choristers, that was one of their duties, is they got to do the pumping of the bellows to create that. So because it can be so mechanical, the other thing is, this is going to be a little bit of organist arrogance. No, throughout history, and even looking at choral singing, an organ supports choral singing much better than a piano or a harpsichord, because you can hold the sound. If I'm holding down the sound, it's keeping that sound level the same to support a congregation of singers or a choir. Whereas with a piano or a harpsichord, you get a lot of sound when you press the keys, but then it's constantly dying away. The other thing from a more ethereal mindset is that the organ is breathing. Because it is actually air moving through, that replicates what the voice is doing. So it is also most similar to singing. And because it's air moving through, there is also something really physical that you can feel. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes, some people have noticed when we do psalms and we talk about the voice of God shaking something, I'll pull the lowest note on the organ, the lowest register, and it shakes. You can feel it because it's not so much the sound, but, and I'm not going to even pretend to be a physicist, but the way that sound waves work at the low pitches is it's doing a lot of this. All sound is vibration, but it's doing a lot of this in something that we as humans can physically feel. So that's another reason why the organ has been a preferred instrument throughout church history.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent question, and that's something I wanted to talk about, so I'm really glad that you asked it. All right. So before I move on, any other questions kind of in general about how the organ works, how it makes sound? And I'm okay if you don't, because I've told you about everything I know. There will not be a quiz, though. So let's look at the stop list, the Schantz organ stop list. So you'll see that there are a lot of numbers on here. Another great thing about the organ is it's a great imitator. So the organ can, if you have a skilled organist, not me, Peter Richard Conti, who is at the Wanamaker in Philadelphia, is one of the most skilled organists I've ever heard in his orchestral transcriptions. He can take an entire orchestra and replicate it as one person. Now, he has 7 keyboards that he's playing with. I'm fine with 3. 2 or 3 is good for me. 4 is a bit overwhelming. 2 and 3, I'm great. But You've got flutes on here. You'll see viola da gamba. You'll see trumpet. These are all different instrumental sounds. Some of them rather directly imitate the name that it's saying. Some of them, it's just the name that is used because of the sound of the organ. Some organ builders, Aeolian Skinner is one of them, Kimball is one of them. They would specifically design what they call orchestral organs that were intended to be a replacement of an orchestra. American organs in the early 1900s favored the orchestral style. Now we've kind of shifted to more of a classical style where we're looking at organs in Europe, the German organs, mostly the German and English organs, the English cathedral organs. Those are the styles that we want to hear because we want to hear an organ. We're not wanting to hear an orchestra. If we wanted to hear an orchestra, we would hear an orchestra. So we've got numbers by everything. Anyone have a guess, and I need to make sure that Lewis is not in here because he's at an advantage. Anyone have a guess what the number represents? I heard it over here. Length of the pipe. So you'll see, do we notice anything else about the numbers other than the fractions and the Roman numerals? Is there anything else that you notice about the numbers? Multiples of 2. I like that you said that. I actually think of it in a different way. They are all even. Powers of 2. Yes, that's going to be more like it. So the 8-foot is what everything is based on in the organ. Everything is based on the 8. So what that 8-foot means, technically that means of that pitch, and I think it's all based around the principle, but of that rank, the lowest note, the biggest pipe, is that length. So look at the great column, we've got principle 8. That's going to be kind of the foundation of the entire organ is the principle 8. The lowest C is 8 feet long. That will explain to you why organs are so big. So we've got how many 8-foot pedal or pipes that we have to get in there. In the pedal, we have 16-foot, and there's a 32-foot. I promise you there's not actually a 32-foot pipe in here. Organ builders have different tricks that they can do. Sometimes instead of building it the full length, they'll double the width, and then they can half the length. They also have other ways, a resultant. This is where I'm not fully educated to explain, but it creates the sound of a 32-foot, but it is not actually a 32-foot. There's some technologies that they can do to create that. One of the ways also that they can do it is to stop. They'll put a cap on the top of the pipe, and then they can have more control over shortening it and widening it to get more in the space when height is a concern. Another thing that they do is they will do what's called mitering. So you'll see some pipes in here are actually bent intentionally. There is some bending unintentionally, which is one of our problems, but they will bend them intentionally so that they can use all of this space and get bigger things in there. So 8-foot is the unison pitch. So if I play a middle C on an 8-foot, I'm getting middle C. What would 4-foot be? Any guesses? A high C. It would be an octave above. So 8-foot being the base, we cut that in half. Now we're an octave above. So I'm hearing a higher pitch. Then 2-foot would be 2 octaves above. So it's split in half twice. So it's 2 octaves above. And then a 16-foot would then be what? Below. 16 is an octave below, and then 32 is 2 octaves below. So then, if you look on the stop list, we have some mixtures. We've got mixtures, and I think we just call them all mixtures on the planche on the swell. The Roman numerals, when you see that, you have that number of pipes playing when you press one key. So, for example, Here is 8-foot middle C on the grate. Now I'm going to add the mixture 4. So right now there are 5 pipes playing, but I'm only pressing 1 key. And there are 4 pipes playing. So mixtures are never played by themselves because that's not very pretty. But if I'm playing and I add in the mixture, it gives that brilliance. I'm using a choral gesture here. There's this brilliance sitting up on top that just helps the sound come through. It's really great to add last verse of a hymn to kind of build it up. That's one thing. Another thing that often helps to build up is adding the lower pitches. So that is what we would call a principal chorus. So that was the principal, 8-foot, the octave, 4-foot, the octave line, little octave, 2-foot, and then the mixture up on top. So that's all a bunch of pipes that look like this. The mixture 4 is actually out in front. If you can see this front set of pipes, they've got 4 lined up. That's the mixture 4. So when I'm playing that, those are the pipes that are speaking. The pipes behind that are the principal, which look very much like the pipes that we passed around. The next type of pipe that we have are flutes. So they mostly imitate a flute, but we have some really good flautists in this congregation who will say, that does not sound like a flute. That's what we call an organ flute. Organ flutes are really good. I really enjoy them for when I play Bach, or I've been using them a lot for the Holy, Holy, Holy. I think flutes sound really good. It's not too overpowering. And they can be meditative. You can use them for solos. The next type of pipes that we have are reeds. So all of the pipes in an organ can come down to 2 types: a flue, which is the pipe that's like a whistle, or a reed. Now it's going to be a little bit confusing because I was a woodwind player growing up, so a reed to me is anything we would call a woodwind: a clarinet, a flute, though that's a really hard one to talk about right now, not wanting to add confusion, saxophone, oboe, bassoon. However, a trumpet is a reed in the organ. Any ideas why? What's that? There aren't lips buzzing, but there is something buzzing. So the reed, yeah. So a reed in the organ is actually because there's a reed that sits. So there's going to be the main pipe that you see on a reed pipe is sitting on top of the actual pipe. So the actual pipe has a reed that buzzes, and it's got a little, the way those are tuned is there's a little wire that tightens or loosens the reed. And that's how they adjust those. Those are also, so you know, the first things to go out of tune on an organ. Even we talked about the weather changes, and what's great about this organ is that it sits right next to an external wall with nothing on the other side, but the reeds are what have the most variance with the change of weather, temperature. I mean, we don't keep this space at 60, we do keep it, I think, around 60 during the week when we're not using it, so it's not kept this temperature constantly. That's going to create a lot of adjustments. So the reed is what goes out of tune the most, and when I have to stop using them, that's the first thing I stop using because it's just going to go out of tune. But everything that is a reed actually has a little lip. I can't think. It's called a tongue, I think, is actually the name of the metal reed that's in there vibrating. But anything that you see that kind of represents an orchestral instrument is probably a reed. So in our organ, we have the trumpet. You'll see we have a trumpet 8. In the pedal, there's a bombard 16. That's actually the same set of pipes It's just when I play the 16, it's playing the same one, just an octave lower. And then we have the clarion, which is also the same set. So the trumpet, clarion, and bombard are all the same set of pipes, and they're making that same sound. Our bombard happens to be really, really buzzy, so I don't use it too much. It's just really, really buzzy. When you get down to the low end, the trumpet is not nearly as buzzy. But sometimes when you've got enough other stuff around it, you don't notice the buzziness. We also have an imperial trumpet, which is the one I played earlier that I said was the bride's trumpet or Christ's trumpet. And then we have what's called a crumb horn. For an organ of this size, that's a surprisingly small number of reeds. You typically would expect probably one more trumpet type reed that's kind of in between being really, really loud and where our regular trumpet is, and another what we call like a color reed or solo reed, like a clarinet is often one that you'll have, a clarinet or an oboe. The crumb horn is kind of in between. There's also, not on our organ, a lot of organs will have what's called a vox humana. Any ideas what a vox humana might be emulating? Human voice. I will tell you, it does not emulate a human voice. The closest, so if I have something that's calling for a vox humana, I'm going to use the crumb horn, and I'm going to add what's called a tremulant, which I didn't talk about, but the tremulant is, it's on the reservoir, and it's a weight that spins, so it gives you that vibrato sound. So here's with the tremulant, and without. And also, so you know an organist's secret, when the reeds start to go out of tune, you just add a tremulant, and then it makes it a little bit better. It's just like when you're a vocalist and you can't quite get on pitch, you just add a little vibrato to it, and you go a little bit above pitch and a little bit below, and the average is right there on pitch. The final thing, so everything we've talked about with the organ right now is air going through, but there are a few things on this organ in particular that don't have air going through, and they are my favorite things. One is called a Zimbelstern. And we have a German speaker or two in the congregation. Who might know what a Zimbelstern translates to? No? Oh. Bell star. So it's a set of bells that are hung in a circle or a star shape, and it's spinning around, and that's what creates that sound. I use it a lot during Christmas time and Easter time. And then we also have, no organ would be complete without. We are not a Methodist church, so we don't use the chimes as much as they might, but I try to include them a little bit. It's one of the battles that I have with Nick. He does not like the tuning of the chimes. Chimes are just out of tune. It's what happens. They're chimes. Those you can't tune, like you can't lengthen a chime unless you want to start getting into metallurgy or shaving it down. So any questions right now on the types of pipes? There's one other thing I did not talk about that I have fallen in love with recently. The other things that go out of tune easily are the mixtures, and when they go out of tune, it's just too painful. You'll see the things on here that have fractions. Those are called mutations. Mutations are really fun because they add a really nice color without overpowering. So here I'm playing the flute 8-foot and the flute 4-foot in the swell. And now I'm adding what's called the Nazard, which is 2 2/3. Here is the tierce, which is 1 3/5. And then here is the 8/4, 2 2/3, and 1 3/5. So some organs don't have mixtures, and they'll create one by adding things like that. So I think it just adds a really nice tone to make something stick out. If I've got something that's calling for different solo voices, I mentioned that we've got the trumpet voice, we've got the crumb horn, but we don't have an oboe, we don't have a clarinet. So if I need to get a different solo voice, but I don't necessarily want to go from a nice, lovely crumb horn solo to a trumpet because it'll ruin the communion mood. I don't use trumpets during communion. I'll pull one of those mutations just to give that extra sound, and it makes it stick out and can be very melodic. The 2/3, and this is where it's going to get really fun. So we talked about 4-foot is the octave above, 2-foot would be 2 octaves above, 2 2/3 is between an octave and 2 octaves. And if a mutation ends in 3, it's a 5th from the note you're playing. So if I'm playing a C, the 5th is a G. So if I have just the 2 2/3 pulled, I play middle C, I'm getting the G that is an octave above. It doesn't work well by itself because you're getting a completely different pitch. But if it's pulled with other sounds, it will make something that sounds pretty. So if a mutation ends in 3, you're getting the 5th. If a mutation ends in 5, you're getting the 3rd. That's not confusing at all. And now you are starting to understand why we organists are the way that we are. Moving on, and I am not paying attention to time, so I'm going to have to start talking fast. Looking at the console. The console, this is a good representation of our console because it's got 3 manuals. You can see we've got the music rack, we've got 3 keyboards, there's a box of tissues. We don't have a box of tissues, but we do have a bottle of hand sanitizer. That's not listed. Cough drops are listed there. I do not store my cough drops at the organ. They are on the bookshelf behind the organ, so they are there. Pencils are in there. There's a clock built into this one. Ours is sitting on the side, so this is all very legit. And paper clips and Post-it flags should also be included in this. We've got the couplers up at the top. So one of the things I did not talk about that I use all the time on this organ are the couplers. That means if I pull a set of sounds for the swell organ, normally you would have to play that on the swell manual, which is the top manual on this organ. But maybe I want those sounds to also play when I'm playing on the grate. Most of the hymns, and the reason I use this, one, is the way that this organ is voiced. It takes a lot of different sets of pipes to be able to support the congregational singing. But rather than just use everything on one division of the organ, I pull from the different divisions. One is because we're located on both sides. So if I'm coupling, this is the choir, so if I'm coupling from the choir and I'm playing it on the grate, you're getting sound from here and from here at the same time. One of the wonderful things about having a divided organ is sometimes the choir will have pieces that there are parts that need to be a cappella, but we only have, one tenor. So he needs to be able to breathe from time to time. He hasn't figured out circular breathing. I don't know what's taken him so long. But when we have a cappella pieces, I can play things on the organ and have it just come from over here, so the organ acts as a member of the choir. In a fun way, that's also why that division is called the choir. Typically with the architecture of organ building throughout history, there is a part of the organ that is around the choir to support the choir and be a member of the choir. And that's called the choir. We also have the swell, which looking at that console is the top keyboard. The choir is the bottom keyboard. And then the grate is the middle keyboard. The swell is called so because historically, especially in a lot of older European organs, you actually don't have expression, and they actually don't use a swell. They have what's called a positif and a rückpositif, which are not typically enclosed. The swell, and in our organ, the choir is also enclosed, is behind shutters. And when I open the shutters, they kind of go like this to allow more sound to come out. So the sound can swell, and that's where it gets its name. And then the great, think of great as in big. It's not about the quality. It's not the great or poor, but the great is in the largest. It's the largest main part of the organ. And that's where it gets its name. Most of the time, it is not enclosed. It can be built to be enclosed, and that's a little bit of organ snobbery between European organists and American organists, because we American organists like our entire organ to be enclosed. It gives us that expression. Europeans don't like that. They are, the way you add more sound is by adding more stops. So it's just different traditions and styles. And of course, no one wants to get along. We just want to say why our system is better. So with the couplers, I can bring things down at the same pitch, which would be 8 foot. I could bring things down at an octave above, which would be 4 foot. And I can bring things down at an octave below, which would be the 16 foot. I could add them all, and you get a really muddy sound. 16, I don't use too much because it just gets muddy. 4 foot I use occasionally, but when things start to go out of tune, it's in the high notes that you hear it. So I tend to don't make everything by default higher when that's what's out of pitch. So I'm gonna stop on that. Oh, I'm not gonna stop because this is one of the other things. Underneath each keyboard, they have what's called pistons. Those are how I go from sets of sounds to sets of sounds. And one of the limitations of this instrument is I have six sets that control the entire organ. And then in each division of the organ, so the swell, great, and choir have 5, and then the pedal also has 5. Because of that is, unfortunately, the way to fix that is to get a new console. And consoles by themselves are not cheap, which is one of the reasons why we need to look at the overall instrument itself and the process. If we were to have a concert organist come in here, they would have a heck of a time because we are limited to 6 presets. Typically what organists, and there's technology with Midi and computer memory, I don't know why that's so loud, that has come up recently. Oh, you know what? Because I bet somebody is getting vested for worship. There's technology that has arisen in the past 20 years that allows that, let's just say on this organ, I've got 6 presets. I could have 100 levels of that 6, so then I technically have 600 presets. And what organists do, and this is really big for concert organists, is they have what's called sequencers. So they'll lay out all of their presets in the order that they want to go, and rather than find this specific button that they want, they just hit the next button and the next button so that they can go from one set to another, especially when you're doing classical organ literature or trying to replicate a symphony, you're playing a transcription, you can go for all those different voicing changes just by hitting a single button. In the old days, that was another thing you would pay choristers for, is to pull the stops that you needed. So that is one of the things, one of the challenges that I do deal with all the time with the instrument, and that's with the console itself. The console also cannot be moved. It is stuck in place. The technology that they used in the early 80s when they built that it's like a spaghetti bowl inside where there's just tubing running, and all of these presets and registrations are controlled by tubing that has air. Sometime maybe in the spring, I want us to think about doing. The American Guild of Organists does what they call pipes, pizza, and maybe it's just pipes and pizza. Is there a third P, Lewis? Pedals, pipes, and pizza. It's a pipe organ encounter where you kind of get some hands-on time with the pipe organ and you get pizza. It's intended for children and teens, but I'm an adult and I like pizza as well, so I think it could be a fun time for all of us. We'll probably have the organ encounter before we have pizza, so we're not getting greasy fingers all over everything. But it'll give you a chance to kind of really play and have fun. But with all of that to say, you can hear wind blowing through this when you're sitting up here. The presider can hear it. I don't know how much the choir can hear it, but it is really noisy. That doesn't happen with the newer console technology. It's also what they call solid state. Right now, sometimes I will go to hit one of the pistons and it doesn't fully engage. So I think I'm going to get one sound and I get half of that sound, and then I have to try to hit it a few times so that it'll work. And that's just part of the technology with all of the tubing in there, and that's just ways that things fail. Organs typically need major mechanical work at 40 to 50 years. This organ was installed in 1983. Guess what was 40 years ago? 1983. In the 1980s, I had mentioned zinc. In the 1980s, a little thing called a computer chip started being made a lot, and it requires zinc. And the technology companies had more money and influence to get the good zinc, and it left the pipe organ builders and the pipe builders with the second-hand or third-hand zinc. I'm really excited about Intel coming to New Albany, but there's a part of me that's like, yeah, stealing all of the zinc. Because of that, I had mentioned the pipes that are bent. We have some pipes that are falling in on themselves. And the only way to deal with that is to replace it. You can't really repair it. What we have done is add some extra security, bracing to the pipes to help hold them up. Otherwise, because, I mean, you can see this is maybe a 5-foot pipe here. It's just standing by itself from its, what we call the toe or the foot of the pipe. Some of the pipes, especially with the zinc, they can't do that, so they need a little extra support, but it's still going to continue to fail. So you can't see it. It's up in the trumpet that's up here in the grate. Some of the pipes are falling in on themselves because of the zinc. Yes, the metal itself is deteriorating and it's losing its strength. We also have, most organs will use leather to seal the wind chests. In this organ, they were using a rubberized component. It's not leather, it's a rubber, but that rubber does not wear the same way that leather does, where some of it will go and you can replace it as it is. With the rubber, it hardens and it starts to crack. And then we get what are called ciphers, where there will be a pipe that will play and it won't stop. And the only way to fix it is to go in and find the pipe. Well, I'll tell you, if that happens in the middle of a service, I did go to the doctor and I got weighed the other day. I wasn't happy about it, but it's hard to squeeze into this thing. Organ builders and maintainers and tuners have to be svelte. So I don't think that that is a career I will ever seek out, but we would have to turn the organ off to get it to stop sounding. If you were here at 9 a.m. on Easter, you heard that. I had to stop playing this organ. I went up to play that organ. Now, if you look at this, there are a lot of options for sounds on this organ. If you look at the organ upstairs, there are 5 sounds that you can get. So it was not possible to fully translate from here to there. That's also one manual. But thank God and thank the congregation of St. John's that we did have a second organ that we could go to and utilize. So that, and then the other thing, with the console not being able to be moved, when I register something, I don't know what it actually sounds like because it's really loud from here. I don't know what you're actually hearing out in the congregation. One of the great things about the Midi technology is you can actually record what you're playing on the organ, including the sound changes. So I would be able to, if we got Midi on a console, I could record what I want it to sound like, what I think it should be, and then hit play and go and sit out where you're sitting and hear what it actually sounds like. And then I could say, oh, I don't want to do that, I want to do this. The only other way I'd be able to do that now is to have someone in here, hey, can you play a few notes for me? I want to hear what this sounds like. I'm not hearing the section of music that I'm going to be playing. I'm hearing someone else just playing some notes. So that's just a little discussion on where the technology has come from the 1980s. So this has been a wonderful instrument, and I'm very grateful for the people who have been at this congregation who have supported the music throughout generations and will continue to support throughout generations. And as we start to look about what comes next, because we're sitting on a money pit, things that happened at Easter are going to keep happening, and unless we invest a lot of money to fix it, we kind of need to look at, do we want to invest the money to fix what we have or find a different solution? But no matter what we do, we want to be respectful of those who have come before us, who have left us these gifts, and also think about the future ahead of us and what we want to leave for our children and grandchildren and the generations that come here who are not even related to us. So, any questions? I know I have not been good about time, and it's 11:10, and we've got to get ready for worship. Thank you so much. Okay, I was going to say, you were on the original committee, weren't you?
We're going to file in eventually. Thank you.
Morning. Here's a couple of extra lift every voices if we need it.